Hello everyone and welcome to Big Rock Moto. Thank you so much for tuning in today. In today's episode on the 2024 Kawasaki KLX300, we're going to do a few things. We're going to go for a ride on the trail. We're going to go for a ride on the road, talk about some of the pros and cons to the bike. We're going to take a walk around, kind of show you the mods and accessories that I've kind of settled on for this bike and some pros and cons of those. We're going to sit down and have a comparison and in-depth conversation about how does the KLX compare to its main competitors. Should you buy a Honda CRF300L? Should you buy a KLX300? Should you buy a DRZ400? Etc., etc. So we're going to do that, and I think that's going to be what a lot of you have been asking for. So for riding fire roads like this, you know, it's kind of a cool bike because you can sit down and cruise. It's cushy and comfortable. Just don't try riding too fast, you know. But it's an awesome bike to go explore and, you know, see everything you want to see, and you're not going to be nervous about like taking a big heavy adventure bike off-road because this thing's only 300 pounds. You know, we've talked about the suspension. The suspension is decent for what it is. It's certainly a lot better than you get on the Honda, but it's not great. It does respond pretty well to adjustment. It is softly sprung, which I think for a lot of people it's a good thing because it's comfortable and it's easy to ride. And it tends to sit lower to the ground because it sags through quite a bit of its stroke. But for a budget dual sport, I think, you know, this is a pretty great package. If this is the kind of riding you want to do. Ow! I have to be careful with that rear shock. I should be standing up. The ergonomics for standing up are okay. They're better with the changes I've done. It's still not, I don't know what it is, but it still feels a little bit off for me on the standing position. I'm not sure quite what's going on there. Maybe it's just more set up a little bit more for, like, I don't know, street riding ergonomics. I don't really know. But, you know, about 25 horsepower is more than enough for trail riding like this. And I really do like the stock gearing. I went back to the stock gearing. The short gearing was just too short, and you were just buzzed out on the highway. If you hear some extra noise from the bike, I was playing around with some stuff. I have the snorkel pulled out of the airbox. Now, what if you want to explore stuff that's a little bit more gnarly? So I do like the KLX for this. Like, this is not even a road at all because I can kind of putt through here. Whoops. These Tusk Recon tires, they grip really well in situations like this. You know, I think this bike is good because if you're not a professional rider, which most of us are not, you can get away with kind of sitting down and really experimenting and learning and just exploring stuff. Like, I would never ride an adventure bike up here on this trail. It's way too gnarly. But it's no problem on the little KLX, the little donkey. All right, let's take a walk around and kind of just briefly cover the changes that I end up sticking to. So I did end up liking the Tusk Recon hybrid tires. I just had to play around with some suspension settings and sag and stuff like that to get my handling kind of where I wanted. But I came up a really steep trail to get here. These things grip like Velcro out here on the trail. They're not a good highway tire, and I don't even think they're highway legal. So please, you know, consider those things before putting them on your bike. They're also very affordable, which I think fits the more budget nature of this bike. The other really important mods, of course, the Tusk handguards, the D-Flex handguards with the little sliders here. The fatty bars and the bar conversion, that was a really, really nice mod. My ergonomics are much, much better now. Double take mirrors, I just have one of the mirrors on right now. The Tusk, this is the small Olympus tank bag. That one fits perfectly on the bike and doesn't seem to get in my way. Seat concept seat, for me this was kind of essential because I just didn't find the factory seat very comfortable. If you're okay with the factory seat, then that's fine, but if you get uncomfortable, just know you have an option for an aftermarket seat there. The Tusk skid plate, a couple things I found there. I did have these front bolts that keep kind of loosening up. And they're not a hex head, they're a Torx head, so make sure you've got that in your little toolkit. But I ended up putting some Loctite on those and putting them back in. I'm happy with that. The IMS foot pegs have been great. The angle's a tiny bit off. I don't know what the deal is there. I think that's to do with the mounting bracket, but the factory pegs were just not usable for me. I did try a Yoshimura exhaust, but the problem was I realized later that it wasn't like street legal, I guess. So, and it was a little bit loud for me. Some people will like it. It just depends on your taste, but I ended up going back to the stock pipe. The fender mod that I did in a video, this is a Rig Gear medium. I think they call it the dual sport tail bag. Fits perfectly on my Tusk rear rack. Let's see, what else? Not too much else really. I've got heated grips ready to get wired up. I put Pro Taper pillow top grips and heated grip elements from Tusk underneath. So there's my cockpit setup. I haven't added any sort of navigation yet. I did end up using a quad lock and just using my phone for one of the rides I did. But one thing we should cover is, let me go around this side because the lighting's a little bit better. One disappointment I have with the KLX in general is just the lack of aftermarket fuel tanks. Because of the frame that goes right here, we can't really get a very big fuel tank. And for the 2024, they don't have any of them out yet, because the previous bikes you can get a 2.7 gallon, but this bike I don't think it fits because of the new plastic, so not totally sure on that, but that's limiting. I'd like to have a 3 to 4 gallon tank for all-day expeditions on a bike like this. That'd be really, really nice. So I think that's kind of it for most of the mods. It's just the basic protection and comfort and ergonomics, and that brings me to, we should talk about power modifications. So, I know a lot of people want to add power to a bike like this, whether it's a KLX or the Honda. I totally get that, and I think that's great. My perspective is maybe a little bit different. The main power restriction of a bike like this is the engine design itself. The cylinder head and the way everything is, the top end of the engine, it's just never going to be able to make very much power. It just cannot. So yes, you can do things like cut open the exhaust, change the exhaust. You can open up the air box, either by drilling holes or taking the snorkel out. You can remove the secondary butterfly valve in the throttle body, which could make throttle response a little more jerky. I like the smooth stock response, but that might give you a couple horsepower if you do all those things. But for me, that's not going to change my opinion of the bike having a couple more horsepower. And I just don't think, for me, it's not worth risking making it, not street legal or out of compliance or whatever. And I can't show that kind of stuff on YouTube because there's so much litigation these days about that kind of stuff. So I get really nervous about showing that. But the power, all that is to say, I've chosen not to do any of that on my bike, just because I don't see the point. Like, it's good like it is. If it's not enough power, then you probably need to get a Honda CRF300L or a KTM or Husky or something, or a Beta. You need to take that level up, because from me, in my opinion, just my opinion, going from 24 horsepower, let's say we get 27 horsepower out of it, but it's going to be louder. It might wreck the mileage. It might not be legal. It's not worth it to me. That's just my opinion. I totally understand other people still want to do that stuff. I just don't think it's really honestly worthwhile. I mean, I could make money by trying to tell you guys to use affiliate links to buy an ECU or change the exhaust or do different things. I'm losing out on revenue by not doing that. And I'm just being totally honest with you all. I just don't think it's really warranted on this kind of bike. I would focus more on improving your riding skill. Maybe getting your suspension set up. That would be the biggest mod for this bike, is getting the suspension sprung and valved for your weight. That would transform the riding of this bike more than a power mod. I don't know why people are so obsessed with power when you just need the chassis to work right, and it doesn't quite work right in stock form because it's too soft. So if you want to ride better and ride quicker, change the suspension. The motor's not the thing holding you back. It just isn't. Let's just be honest about it. Adding more to what I was saying earlier, I think people are just way too focused on horsepower, and they think that the way for their bike to perform better is always adding more power, but that just is not the case. It just isn't. You need to make the suspension work and the chassis work properly before you worry about power. This is not only true on a dual sport or an enduro bike, but it's true on street bikes even more. Everybody's chasing a couple horsepower on their street bike when they don't know how to ride it in the first place, and they don't have their suspension set up. So you can tell I have kind of a pet peeve about this whole thing, but I really do. All that is to say, the best thing you could do for this little KLX is give it a proper suspension makeover. I'm telling you, I promise you, try it. If you don't believe me, go try it. Have the suspension done by a suspension shop. Get springs, get it resprung, get it revalved, get the sag set for your weight, get a sag checker tool, or have your spouse help you set the rear sag. It's going to transform the bike. Forget about the power stuff. Just forget about it. Like, who cares? I mean, let me show you the bike acceleration. It's fine. I mean, it's fast enough to have a crash, right? It's fast enough to do whatever. You don't need that. You need to make the chassis work better. So sorry to be on such a soapbox. Now, would having a little extra power be nice? Yeah, I would, but I would still do the suspension first. So out here on the highway, you know, the KLX is a good bike if you need to cruise the highways around 65 miles an hour, or about 100 to 110 kilometers an hour. So it's good for that. What is this person doing? I don't know. I mean, that's full throttle right there. The bike, it doesn't have a lot of power, right? But it's adequate to go 60 or 65. What I do appreciate about it is there's really no vibes from the engine, at all. So even at, what is this, 7,000 RPM, I wasn't even in top gear, 6,500 RPM, so 7,000 RPM is about 65 miles an hour. I mean, I'm going up a hill full throttle, and I can't go over 64. So again, I mean, the bike doesn't have a ton of power. You can do power mods if you want, that's up to you. I just don't really see the point in it on this bike. The other nice thing about, if you have to, I don't know where this guy's going, if you have to put in some highway miles, you're not worried about putting a ton of miles on it, because it's really kind of a street bike engine, so you don't have the high maintenance. So I appreciate that as compared to riding one of my, like my Husky or a KTM or something like that. See, now we're going downhill, we can go about 70 miles an hour, no problem. It'd just be nice if it had, you know, if this was a KLX350 or 400, my gosh, would that be so perfect.
Alright, I think it's about time we do the break-in service on the KLX300. So it's really essentially just an oil change and then checking over the bike, setting your chain tension, you know, basic things like that. You can get more involved if you want, but for most people, realistically, it's just an oil change. So let me show you how the oil change works on the KLX. It's super simple. So here's what I've got for parts. I'm making an entry in the service log in the back of the owner's manual. The owner's manual is always your best friend. Make sure when you buy a motorcycle that you read your owner's manual. I've got a Tusk oil filter. This is a Tusk oil change kit, and they give you, actually, where's the rest of it? I gotta find it, but they give you oil, a filter for the bike, and then they give you this too. They get a crush washer specific for your bike, and they give you this disposable paper funnel. So you know what? It's kind of a convenient thing, because you can just, you know, throw the funnel away when you're done, and then you know you've got the right crush washer, you know you got the right oil filter, and you can choose different kinds of oil. So I'm a fan of that setup. It just makes it easy. You don't have to think about it too much and figure out the part number for everything and all that. Now, to change the oil on the KLX, what you have is, so the oil filter cover is very old school Japanese bike stuff. You've got two 8mm, or M6 I should say, bolts here. We'll pull out, the oil filter pops off, and then under here, my Tusk skid plate does have a, there's the drain bolt there for the oil. So we'll go ahead and take the drain bolt off, drain it into our pan, take this off. Oh, the messiest part is always, you know, catching the oil that drools out of this thing. And then we'll go ahead and load her up with some fresh oil. So let's get started. Oil draining out, pretty much done there. It does make a mess on the bottom of the skid plate, so, you know, may end up taking it off to get that all cleaned up, or just use a bunch of degreaser and get this all nice and clean from the oil. So there's a kind of an annoying little thing with the oil filter on the KLX. You've got this little spring. This little spring sits in here between that and the oil filter, but you see what happens is it just falls out. So, and there's nothing on the back of the oil filter really. Let me try to show you. there's really nothing here to like retain the spring. So when you try to like put it in, everything just falls apart. So, you know, people online, they've said, okay, just put a dab of grease on that to kind of hold that in place while you, because it fits in there like that. I don't know if you can see, but it fits in there. And, you know, anyway, kind of a stupid design by Kawasaki's part. I don't understand this at all, that they don't have any retention for the spring, but it's no big deal. You just do that, and then the oil filter will then, once the spring is installed, the oil filter goes like that, and then the oil filter cap goes back on. So I'm going to go ahead and get that done, and then get some new oil in here. It takes 1.2 quarts of oil, so pretty small capacity, but it's a pretty small engine. Then we'll move on after that.
Does somebody need a handguard? There's a black Acerbi handguard right there if somebody needs one. Ooh. You do feel the additional weight of a bike like this compared to a KTM or something that's a good 50 pounds less. Doesn't mean you can't do the thing, it just means that it's heavier. So if you're somebody who doesn't have a dual sport bike or a dirt bike and you think about getting into it, I highly encourage you to do it. I mean, you're going to find so many places that are just so amazing. You're just out by yourself, you find these little trails, and you can go anywhere, because if you ride like a bigger heavy adventure bike or something, you're not going to go to a place like this. You know, effectively these are just glorified hiking trails, right? This is so much fun, and a bike like the KLX will allow you to learn this kind of riding in a non-threatening way and without spending too much money. This is where you would appreciate lower gearing for sure on a trail like this, but I'm still going along at 6 miles an hour. I'm not stalling, so I guess it's okay. You just have to abuse the clutch sometimes. This is so much fun. I love these little rock features like this. We got branches. We got branches. Barely get the foot pegs through those. And I love this kind of riding because it's so athletic. You know, it's like good aerobic workout. As I stall out like a dope. Come on. I need to adjust the clutch. My clutch is not adjusted right. So much fun. Just kind of tractor through. Whoa! That was foot peg.
All right, one topic to cover is, am I going to keep this bike? I don't know yet. I'm trying to decide. Honestly, as I'm filming this, I'm undecided about whether I'm keeping it. I do like it. It is cool to have an extra dual sport around, but I am doing the Husky build out right now on my FE501, which, yes, is very expensive, but it also performs far, far beyond this could ever perform. I think there's a place for reliability and quiet and an easy to ride bike like this. I just don't know how often I'll get to use it. So I'm kind of undecided, and I wonder, you know, if I sold this, I could use that money to test out a beta, test out something else, maybe a Honda 450, since I've never done one of those. There's some other things I could do. So I'm having that debate. I don't know. Let me know what you think, but just toying with the idea of selling it or keeping it. I don't know what other video content to make with it. Really, I'm not doing the power mod stuff, and I've explained that. So I don't know what else to do in terms of content creation.
so I could keep it around as a bike to have, but I could use that money, to do something else. So I'm really undecided. And the problem for me is that I've gotten used to these high performance bikes, Betas, KTMs, Huskies, whatever. They're so much lighter, they have so much more power, they have so much better suspension. It's kind of hard to get back on a bike like this. There's nothing wrong with it. It's an excellent motorcycle. I just would prefer to spend my time riding something a little bit better. I hope that makes sense and is not offensive. All right, back in the studio. A lot of people are trying to decide whether they should get the KLX or the Honda or the Yamaha or the DRZ, etc., etc. So I'm going to go ahead and put this up on the screen here somewhere where hopefully you can see this chart and still see me. We'll try to make that work in the editing. So let's compare the KLX to the competitors. Now, I can't ultimately tell you which bike is best because there is no best bike. That just doesn't work that way. It's just not that simple. But what I can give you is some good comparison information, some pros and cons, some things to look at so you can decide what might be the best bike for yourself. Now, all the bikes I've chosen in this little comparison chart are motorcycles you can go out today, at least in the US anyway, and purchase brand new. So there are bikes like Yamaha's discontinued WR250R, which was a pretty high performance 250 dual sport, but they discontinued that a number of years ago. So really, to be fair, I'm not including that here. If you're looking at used motorcycles, it will open up your options quite a bit more, and you should definitely look at that. But if you want to buy a brand new bike, there's probably 6 bikes that I think compete most directly. You've got the KLX300, which I'm reviewing here, Honda CRF300L, which I've also reviewed and ridden quite a bit, the CRF300L Rally, which I had for 6 months, a long-term test, Yamaha's XT250, which I've ridden, but I have not done a video on, the DRZ400S, which I have a ton of experience with, and Kawasaki's own KLX230, which is a more affordable alternative to the KLX300. So in terms of the pricing, the KLX is about halfway between like a DRZ and something like the Honda or maybe the KLX230. In terms of horsepower and torque, the KLX is really competitive, about the same horsepower as the Honda 300 motors are. If you look at something like the XT250 or the KLX300, you're going from about that 24 horsepower mark down to about that 17, 16 horsepower area. Now, if you want to jump up to the DRZ400 for about $1,000 more than the KLX, you jump up to about 32 horsepower. These are all at the wheel. So I tried to look up actual dyno results. So these are power numbers at the wheel, not at the crank. So that's a huge difference, right? There's a huge spread there. And the DRZ is way, way more powerful, and you feel that when you ride it. Now torque. Also torque, of course, bigger motor, bigger torque. So if you want that, you've got to go up to something like the DRZ. Now, why is Honda CRF300L not in this comparison? Only because of really a price. That bike is over $10,000, so I just didn't think that it was really fair. It's kind of apples and oranges at that point. But the CRF, to me, is sort of that modernized, more powerful 6-speed fuel-injected DRZ. Anyway. Transmission, so most of the bikes here have 6 speeds except the older DRZ design, which is the 5-speed, and the older Yamaha XT, which is still a 5-speed. The weight, they're all in that 300 to 320 pound or 135 to 150 kilo area. So really, like the DRZ is about 17 pounds heavier than the KLX, and you do feel that. Now, as I go into the specs, at the end of the specs, I'm going to kind of give you a little bit more subjective sort of opinion about these bikes, okay? But let's just get through the specs first. So the DRZ is the heaviest for sure. The CRF300L Rally is heavier, because you've got the rally fairing and the windshield, you got the larger gas tank. Seat height, so the DRZ is very, very tall. The nice thing about some of these other bikes is that you get a more approachable seat height. Now, the Yamaha is the lowest on this group, but I will tell you that Honda makes a low version of the CRF300L called the LS. Kawasaki also has the KLX230S. So there are options there if you're vertically challenged and you want those lower seats. So make sure you look into those.
Fuel capacity, one of my complaints about the KLX, it's only 2 gallons or 7.5 liters. You know, they're all, I mean, the DRZ, the Yamaha, they have a little bit more fuel. If you want more fuel, you're looking at aftermarket options for tanks, or you could get that CRF300L Rally. Adjustable suspension. So the only 2 bikes on the list here that have adjustable suspension for the damping anyway, so your compression, rebound damping, things like that, are the KLX and the DRZ. The DRZ has the best suspension of this group by a long shot, but it's also much taller. It's also a much taller bike, so you have to factor that in. ABS. A lot of riders want ABS. If you're commuting with your bike, using it more on the highway, depending on how you're going to use it, you might want ABS. You can't get that on the KLX300. Surprisingly, though, the KLX230 comes with ABS. On the Hondas, it's an optional system. You can't get it on the DRZ or on the Yamaha XT. Service intervals are also something to consider. So like the KLX has, if you look in the owner's manual of all these bikes, and I've looked all these up, I took the time to do it. So the valve adjustment interval, which I call the major service interval, is 7,500 miles or 12,000 kilometers on a KLX300. But if you look at the CRF300L, it's double that. It's 16,000 miles or 25,000 kilometers. That's a major consideration. I mean, maintenance is a significant cost, whether you're doing it yourself, I guess, the cost of your time. But most people are going to have it done in a service shop or a dealer. You have to deal with that cost. So that's kind of nice that you have those longer intervals with the Honda. Also, the DRZ has a surprisingly long valve adjustment or major service interval as well. So more of a subjective comparison. What I've done is I've got 5 sticky notes here to talk about. Handling, aftermarket support, suspension, carburetor versus fuel injection, and value proposition. So let's start with handling. So I think the best handling bike on this list out of the box is the KLX300. Yes, it feels the lightest, it handles the most like a dirt bike, the suspension is quite good, it's easy to ride, I enjoy the off-road handling, it feels nimble and agile like I want a smaller dual sport to feel. The DRZ feels a bit bigger, a bit heavier. You can ride the DRZ faster maybe if you're an experienced rider because you have more suspension there, you have more travel, you have a stiffer setup. But in terms of handling, like on single track or enduro trails, I would definitely have to give the nod to the KLX300 here. The Hondas are okay, but they're really held back by the factory suspension, which is just incredibly squishy, and it really compromises the entire handling of the bike. It's difficult to ride those bikes in a spirited manner unless you do suspension work. All right, aftermarket support. Aftermarket support is really good for the DRZ because it's been out forever, and it's really good for the Hondas. The KLX does suffer from maybe less aftermarket support. I mean, we saw that in this series. I was only able to find one legitimate foot peg option. There's really no fuel tank options for the 2024s. If you have the 23s or earlier, you can get the IMS tank that gives you a little bit extra capacity. The Honda, I like the Hondas because you can get differing aftermarket fuel tank options because the design of the frame is different. You're not really too limited there, and you can get larger tanks, which I really appreciate on those Hondas. That might push me towards going that direction. I don't know so much about the aftermarket for the Yamaha. I don't think it's great. It's okay, and the KLX230 is okay. But really, the Hondas and the DRZs are going to be your winner there if you want to do customizations. Suspension, we've kind of already mentioned this. So the DRZ has the best suspension for sure, despite being a much older platform. It's fully adjustable, it's long travel, and it's a stiffer setup. You can ride that bike faster. Second would be the KLX300. Then I would put the Hondas at the bottom. Well, I don't know. The XT250 and the KLX230 are pretty soft as well. So anyway, take that for what it's worth. Carburetor versus fuel injection. So the DRZ is the only bike in this category that's still carbureted. And it just depends on your preference. I don't like carburetors personally. I really dislike them. I just find that they're harder to deal with. They don't deal with elevation changes as much. Riding conditions change. They seem to be easier to get clogged. They're much more complicated. There's many more parts in a carburetor than there are in a fuel injection system.
Fuel injection, despite being more modern, and some people think it's more advanced, it is more advanced, but it's also more elegant, more simple. There's less to go wrong. They just seem to be more reliable. I want my bike to start up on a cold, wet morning and not have issues. So for me, carburetors are a thing of the past. I don't care about them. I don't want anything to do with it. And fuel injection is far superior. And I think it's more reliable as well, which I know flies in the face of what some folks think, especially some older folks. But I just don't agree with that. Value, that's a tough one. All these bikes are good value, I think. I mean, especially compared to some of the bikes that I have in the garage. I mean, these things all give you a lot of bang for the buck. I would say the Honda and the Kawasaki, they're all fine. I mean, the difference in price, so $700 more to get the KLX versus the Honda. I mean, it's $700, okay? So you could look at it as, well, you know, I'm getting much better suspension out of the box for that $700, and that's probably worthwhile. But if you're going to modify, if you're heavier, or you're just going to modify the suspension no matter which bike you get, then I would just start with a Honda. Because if you're spending the money, like for me, I'd probably just go with a Honda at this point, just because I know I've got to change the suspension anyway. And if I'm spending the money, I'd rather start with a less expensive bike. Plus, I like the dashboard better on the Honda. I mean, it's close though. It's not, you know, they're pretty close in price. So which bike is right for you? You have to decide that. I've given you as much information as I can. I think all the bikes on this list are really great for the money. And of course, you should also look at used bikes as well and see what's out there. You might get a great deal on a fully set up and tricked out whatever, you know, WR250 or DRZ or even one of these bikes, other bikes on the list. I don't know. So try to take all the information and make the choice that's best for you. I hope this has been helpful. All right, well, I think that about wraps it up for, what is this, episode 4 on the KLX300. I hope this has been useful and informative. I hope it's not the last episode, but if it is, thank you so much for watching this series. It's a great little motorcycle. I don't think you'd regret if you got one. Take a look at the competitors, consider the pros and cons, and I really appreciate you watching this series. There might be more episodes. I'm in that mode where I don't know yet. I don't know if I'm going to keep the bike or not. But whether I do or not, there'll be more dual sport content coming on my Husqvarna, but also other dual sports that are yet to come in the future. And of course, other adventure and street motorcycles as well. I really appreciate your support. If you like the independent journalism and testing work that I'm doing here at Big Rock Moto, there are ways to support this work, and that'll be down in the description and the pinned comment below. Thank you so much for watching. Please ride safe, and I'll see you out there. You! Does somebody need a handguard? There's a black Acerbi handguard right there if somebody needs one.